Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to get started with our webinar today. Thank you so much for coming. We're here to learn about the Oakland Institute's latest report called Nicaragua's Failed Revolution, the Indigenous Struggle for Saneamiento. My name is Kendall Dunnigan, and I'm the director of the Resilient Communities program at the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center in Northern California. And I work with Mosquito communities on food security and forest protection. I will be the moderator for today, and our webinar should last about 60 to 75 minutes. So for those of us who've been working with Mosquito people and on tropical forest conservation in Central America, we are thrilled to have this independent report from the Oakland Institute, really shedding a light on the gravity of the situation in Nicaragua. There's been such a response to the report that we had to raise the limit of the call from 100. And as I mentioned, there's almost 200 people joining us today. We will be hosting other webinars in the future. This one is being recorded and it will be shared. And the Spanish language version of the report is almost done, and there will be a Spanish language webinar as well. So thank you so much for all joining us today. And we have people from many different continents with us, Mosquito people and their supporters, Indigenous rights advocates, forest defenders, funders, media, legislators. There are Kenyan pastoralist advocates with us from Africa today. So thank you all so much who are on the call and who are working towards land rights and justice for Indigenous people and the protection of our forests. The purpose of this call is to really learn more about this very huge report that the Oakland Institute has put together and really learn some of the key issues that are impacting Indigenous Nicaraguans, to also understand the legal context that this struggle is happening within, to learn more about the specific impacts on the Indigenous cultures in Nicaragua, and then to learn about the work that's being done on the ground. The agenda for today is as follows. We're going to have 4 presenters, and first is Anuradha Mittal, who is the executive director of the Oakland Institute, and she is the report's author. She will be giving us the highlights from that report. Next, Guillermo Rodríguez, who is the Mexico and Central America Advocacy Officer at CEJIL, the Center for Justice and International Law, based in San Jose, Costa Rica, will explain to us more about the legal protections for Indigenous land rights in Nicaragua and some of the barriers to their implementation. Next, we will hear from Lottie Cunningham, who is a Mosquito woman and human rights lawyer and the founder of CEJUDHCAN, the Center for Justice and Human Rights in the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua. And she's based in Puerto Cabeza, Nicaragua. And she has been leading the litigation of the 97 different Mosquito communities for their land rights. And today she's going to talk about the direct impacts on her peoples. I'm going to talk about the work that my organization, the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center, is doing in conjunction with CEJUDHCAN and other partners to address the issues the communities are facing. And then we will have a short Q&A session. And given the number of people on the call, how it will work is that you'll use the Q&A box that is at the bottom of your screen. So please don't use the chat box for questions. Because it's a webinar format, there should be a Q&A box. So you can use that and you can put questions in at any time, and we'll be drawing from those during the Q&A session. And then finally, we're going to close with a surprise because we have the honor of giving out an award to one of our panelists today. So we thank you all so much for being here, and let's get started hearing about the report. Anuradha, take us away. Anuradha, you're gonna have to unmute yourself. There you go, thanks.
Yes, webinars and this technology is still very new to some of us, but good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the webinar on our latest report, Nicaragua's Failed Revolution. Kendall, thank you so much for agreeing to moderate this panel discussion. Before I start off, I wanted to say a word about the Oakland Institute. We are an independent think tank that works at the nexus of land, food, agriculture, development, and human rights. We are an independent think tank. That means we do not accept any government or corporate funding. Support comes from individuals, family foundations. So this allows us to take on powerful actors and governments and be accountable to the impacted communities. The opinions that are expressed in our reports and in this report are ours alone, and they're based on meticulous, rigorous research and independent analysis for which we are known around the world. Our work is often driven by requests from directly impacted communities, as was the case with our work in Papua New Guinea, in Sri Lanka, Argentina, Uganda, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and now in Nicaragua. So this work, this research was initiated at the request of the Mosquito communities in the North Caribbean Coast Autonomous Region, who are engaged in the struggle for Saneamiento, which is means basically clearing of individuals and corporations from the ancestral lands there to which they hold inalienable rights. These individuals and corporations who do not have legal titles or the consent of the community to be there. Mosquito communities and other indigenous groups and Afro-descendant communities are facing land invasions and violence. By the time of the release of the report, the situation had so worsened that we had to redact names and blur photos and remove a lot of photos from the report of the community members that we spoke to. This work is based on extensive desk research as well as field research. This research was a humbling experience, traveling to several communities, living on the banks of Rio Coco in the North Caribbean coast. Their lands are rich with minerals and forest, and they face invasions which are driven by land grabs for gold and copper mining, cattle ranching, and forestry schemes, destroying, as I mentioned before, the inalienable land rights which are enshrined in the country's laws, and a real challenge to the very right to life. Traveling on a wooden boat, and actually I'm going to see if we can get us my slides. So traveling on a wooden boat amidst heavy torrential rain, I got to visit communities that have no electricity or potable water or other basic services like clinics. But they do have the Zika virus, malaria. They live with fear of the violence from the colonos. I got to speak to internally displaced, sorry. Actually, can you remove my slides, Andy, can you please remove my slides? Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, as I was saying, I got to speak to internally displaced families who were forced from their homes and farms after their loved ones were killed and their villages burned. I heard from fathers and mothers whose sons were brutally shot dead, wife whose husband was taken away by the colonos and remains disappeared. Met with families who have seen their loved one disappear, or people who have been separated from their families due to this violence. These communities are supposedly under the provisional and protection orders of the Inter-American Court and the Commission. So while Nicaragua's laws established autonomy of indigenous communities, these rights are being systematically denied, as exposed in our report. Since January 2020, 8 people in the North Caribbean coast have been killed, bringing the total number of killings since 2015 to 44. Dozens have been injured, kidnapped, disappeared, and thousands displaced due to these land invasions. The communities are steadfast in their struggle for Saneamiento. Some of the communities I visited were also visited by a government delegation, actually just a day before I got to go there, looking for evidence to undermine the lawyers who represent these communities at the Inter-American Court. afraid that the government will take their photos and tell the court that the indigenous want to cohabitate with these settlers from outside. These fierce communities, who have nothing, had attached homemade posters to their clothes. They said the government can take the photos, but they cannot claim what we really see. And our demand is for Saneamiento. So there's a complete disconnect between the reality on the ground and what transpires at the national level or what is reported to the international community. Media has covered specific incidents of violence against the indigenous, as was the case this January when Alal community in the Mayangana Soni As territory was attacked by over 80 armed men. 4 people were killed, 2 injured, and 16 houses burned. What our report does is that it exposes that this violence is driven not just by the colonos, the settlers, but also by transnational corporations and the Nicaraguan government. Driven by unfettered capitalism, a socialist government is lauded by corporations for the ease of doing business. Pro-Nicaragua government's investment agency is offering over 7 million hectares of land for mining concessions. This represents over 60% of the country's territories. And the killings this year in the North Caribbean coast have been in the mining region. Major mining companies have come from Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, Colombia, and they are operating on these indigenous lands. The executives declare that the government could not be more supportive of these mining companies. At the same time, there is no transparency and communities report no consultations for their consent. Instead, they face poisoning of the creeks and rivers and violent repression when they challenge the takeover of their lands and environmental destruction, as evidenced in the report. Another major driver is logging and forestry projects. Majority of the country's primary forests are found in the autonomous regions, which face heavy deforestation. And yet, the investment agency Pro-Nicaragua is offering 3.5 million hectares for forestry projects, which comprises 30% of the entire country. Report also details companies such as Alba Forestal, a company which Ortega family has personal links to. It is also deeply disturbing that some of the mining executives, like Randy Martin from the United States, have also set up forestry projects, managing to get financing from European so-called development agencies like FinFund and Netherlands Development Finance Company. And lastly, the report mentions that cattle ranching is a big driver. Nicaragua has the largest cattle raising industry in Central America, and it is mainly for exports. Growth in this sector, which has been driven by exports, has come not only at the expense of Nicaragua's forests, but also indigenous land rights. And while there is no nationally coordinated traceability system for cattle and supply chain, the report shows that the autonomous regions are the departments with the highest concentration of cattle. More important, the report brings forward evidence that exposes the role of the Nicaraguan state and its officials, which is one of complicity and collusion in the violence that the indigenous face. Since the passage of the Law 445 in 2003 and the Sandinista government led by Daniel Ortega in power since 2006, 23 territories in Nicaragua, representing approximately 31% of the national territory, have been titled. However, as the report shows, Law 445 remains an empty promise. Different administrations have used the strategy of settling colonos, settlers in the Caribbean coast, of exploiting the riches and minerals of these areas by transnational corporations. But it is under the Ortega administration that the demand for saneamiento, as guaranteed by national law, has been rigorously suppressed and undermined, not only through affording impunity to the settlers for their violence, but also through direct involvement of government officials. We obtained documentation exposing how several officials, including Carlos Aleman, who is the coordinator of the autonomous regional government of the North Caribbean coast, and other FSLN and Yatama officials are involved in illegally granting land titles in the ancestral lands of the indigenous. The report, which took a lot of courage, mentions names of officials that are directly involved in the national and international arena in trying to suppress the struggle of the indigenous to be known by the outside world. While the international community has focused on the brutal crackdown of popular protest in Nicaragua in 2018, decades of plight of the indigenous remain ignored. The killings, the kidnappings, the violence, the fact that the people can no longer go to their farms, they face hunger and severe food insecurity, that goes ignored. So the purpose of this report is to shatter that silence and uplift the struggle of the indigenous for Saneamiento in Nicaragua. Thank you again for being here, and I look forward to your questions.
Great, thank you, Anuradha. I appreciate that short overview. The report is almost 100 pages long, so good job on pulling out some of those key pieces. But yeah, it's really worth a read. The depth of research into the enormity of the land that has been extricated from indigenous control is truly shocking. It's really important to understand this Law 445 that Anuradha referred to in the legal context in which indigenous communities are struggling. So I'd like to invite Guillermo Rodríguez from CEJIL to talk to us more about Law 445 and how that works. Thank you, Guillermo. Guillermo, you need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Kendall, and thank you all for the invitation. It is an honor for me to share this virtual panel with all of you. Let me start by going a little bit on the history and the background of all this fight. I am sharing a couple of slides. Could you properly look at it? Okay. The case of, I'm starting saying that the case of Nicaragua is quite particular. It's quite particular because it has one of the broadest legal frameworks for the recognition of indigenous identity and autonomy, maybe in the world. But it happens that this entire legal framework ends up in the practice being a dead letter. Since 1987, the political constitution of the Republic of Nicaragua recognizes the native and Afro-descendant peoples, establishing the right, and I quote, to maintain and develop their identity and culture, to have their own forms of social organization, to administer the local affairs, to maintain their communal forms of dealing with property and land, and the use and enjoyment of them. Moreover, in 2010, Nicaragua did ratify Convention 169 of the International Labour Organization that, as you probably know, establishes the consultation of indigenous and tribal peoples. However, the Nicaraguan regulatory framework did not establish the mechanisms to enforce these rights, in particular, the territorial rights of indigenous peoples. Following a contentious case brought before the Inter-American Court by the Mayagna indigenous community of Aguas Tigni on the Nicaraguan Atlantic coast in 2001, that Lottie and other colleagues litigated, by the way, the Inter-American Court issued a judgment in favor of that indigenous community, noting that although the national law recognized and protected the communal property, it lacked the adequate tools to measure, demarcate, and title indigenous communal lands. Consequently, it ordered the state to adopt the necessary measures to create an effective mechanism to do so. In response, in 2003, the state promulgated the Law 445 that aims to, and I quote again, guarantee indigenous peoples and ethnic communities full recognition of the rights of the communal property, use, administration, management of traditional lands and their natural resources by their demarcation and titling. To carry out this process of demarcating and titling the indigenous lands, Law 45 establishes the authorities and mechanisms responsible to govern and develop the process of legalization of the territories. Among them, the National Commission of Demarcation and Titling, CONADETI for its Spanish acronym, which is responsible for directing the demarcation process and deciding on the demarcation request. According to the law, the demarcation and titling process consists of 5 stages summarized in the slide. And sorry for the title, that there is a mistake there. It should say stages of Saneamiento. It should say the stages of the demarcation and titling process, which consists of 5, as I said, of 5 steps. First of all, the presentation of the request by the communities themselves, followed by a resolution of border or humanitarian conflicts that may have arisen in the terms of defining the borders of the communities. In third place, the third step is the measurement or marking of these communities. Then we have the titling itself. And finally, we have the Saneamiento. This fifth and final stage of the process of execution of the title of the collective lands is the one that allows the effective exercise of the rights of the communities in their territories. Since July 2013, CONADETI affirmed that the titling processes have been concluded in 3 territories, and therefore were ready to start with the Saneamiento activities. However, it did not order the Rural Titling Office or other authorities to support the communities to make the titles effective, specifically, as Anuradha said, to force the removal of usurping individuals or groups from their lands. This lack of action to enforce the law has been a central factor in the current crisis. In fact, in one of the different public hearings before the Inter-American Court, the Nicaraguan government denied its responsibility to achieve the saneamiento of the tidal lands, noting that it was the obligation of the indigenous communities themselves to do so through negotiation with the settlers and third parties. Here's where the Oakland Institute's findings are pretty relevant, because the report identifies the drivers behind the migration to the North Atlantic regions. I'm not going in detail here, as Anuradha has already explained the motivations behind the arrival of settlers or colonos. The case is that this has provoked the accelerated and illegal exploitation of Miskito indigenous lands by third parties. In 2013, CONADETI itself warned about the need to significantly increase state resources to enforce the titles granted and emphasize the risk of violence in face of state inactivity. Despite this official warning, the state of Nicaragua did not take any effective action to implement territorial saneamiento. On the contrary, indigenous leaders have reported that starting in 2013, there was a massive and aggressive occupation of tidal territories by settlers. Taking the figures for only 12 communities in just the second half of 2015, there were more than 22 violent incidents against the communities. The score of these attacks was 7 community members assassinated, 4 disappearances, and 16 wounded people, including children and adolescents. The aggressions included the destruction and theft of property in the indigenous communities, as well as widespread death threats to the members, insisting that they stop visiting and working their plots, that they give up their lands, and above all, that they abandon any effort to claim their rights. As such, representatives of the communities went before the national police to report what happened. However, these complaints did not result in actions to protect them, prevent future attacks, or to investigate the facts. Despite all efforts, the authorities did not take any action to carry out territorial saneamiento or to investigate, prosecute, and punish those responsible for the violence against the community. This lack of response from the authorities has left the communities unprotected since then. Here's when, in October 2015, both CEJIL and CEJUDHCAN requested the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to adopt protective measures in favor of the communities of Esperanza Riogagua, Santa Clara, Wisconsin, and Francia Sirpi, in the Miskito Indigenous Territory of Huanquitihuitas-Barraya. Subsequently, the Inter-American Commission was asked to extend the protective measures in favor of 8 more communities, as well as to the members of CEJUDHCAN, Lottie herself being one of them, obtaining a favorable decision by the Inter-American body. Up to this point, we had already obtained protective measures for all the 12 communities that are the ones mentioned in the Oakland's report. But so far, these were granted, as I said, by the Inter-American Commission. The Inter-American system reserves one additional process in cases of great risk that implies that the Inter-American Court can add its own protective measures to put more pressure in the states when the situation demands it. This final step cannot be done without going through the Commission in the first place, which means, in most cases, that the court comes up when the states fail to attend the Commission's call. This was the situation in the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua. Faced with the lack of implementation of the protective measures granted by the Commission, and due to the increase in violence, the Commission thus requested the Inter-American Court to also adopt protective measures in favor of the beneficiary communities and the members of CEJUDHCAN. So in September 2016, the Inter-American Court did grant the measures in favor of 5 communities then, reaching 8 nowadays, and the 2 members of CEJUDHCAN included. I want to stop a bit here to clarify the implication of this process before the Inter-American system. This specific litigation and the figures that I mentioned do not cover the whole extent of the conflict in the Caribbean coast. There is a whole reality of harassment, threats, physical aggressions, forced displacement, even hunger that goes far beyond the scope of this legal strategy. However, even though we litigated in behalf of these 12 specific communities, the whole intention behind this was to raise a structural problem that commonly affects all the indigenous people in Nicaragua. And I think that we did it to some extent. Within the framework of the protective measures regarding the Mosquito communities, the Inter-American Court reminded the Nicaraguan state that Saneamiento is part of the necessary measures to guarantee the integrity of the territories of the indigenous communities. In the same sense, it ordered Nicaragua to establish a participatory body that would gather the available information on the conflict in the shortest time possible, which would diagnose the sources of the conflict and propose solutions and paths to peace. And in spite of all these facts, the state still has not taken measures to address the source of the danger to the beneficiary communities, that is, the lack of saneamiento of the indigenous territories and the presence of settles in them. In the absence of action by authorities, the territorial invasion and threats continue. The impunity enjoyed by those responsible is a decisive factor that favors the advancement of the settlers in the indigenous communities and the continuation of persecution of the communities, having as a result a grave human rights, food, and even humanitarian crisis in the Caribbean coast. Here, I think Lottie is the right person to go deeper on the consequences of the invasion to the communities. I'm stopping now and giving the floor to her so you can listen directly from Lottie how this whole situation has put the Mosquito people and Indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples of Nicaragua in general on a course, perhaps on a course towards ethnocide. Thank you very much for the space.
Titanyam ni sutra almukinanira makabisna wantawan uplikastor kaparam sakay. Good morning, everyone, and to some good afternoon. I request permission from my ancestors to present the situation of my people. My name is Lottie Cunningham. I was raised in a Mosquito village named Bilhuascarma and the Rio Coco in Mosquitia, Nicaragua. I was raised by my grandmother. She raised 11 of her grandchildren, who taught me to be this indigenous woman, to struggle for my people rights and for Mother Nature. When I was small, I used to hear my grandma speak with the trees. When the trees don't give fruit, she would go speak with the tree and tell the tree he came to this earth to provide food and he must provide food. She passed her years protecting the trees with clean water and organic compost so they would provide fruit for us. She taught us to give to the tree and the tree will give to us. As indigenous people, this is what we believe about our nature. Now I will tell you what my people are facing. Nicaragua is in a deep human rights crisis. In the last 10 years, the state has been restricting citizen expression, closing public spaces, and accelerating a process of institutional deterioration. This process have had a huge impact on the indigenous and Afro-descendant people on the Caribbean coast. Indigenous and Afro-descendant people on the Caribbean coast live in 304 villages in 23 territories. 90% of our territory face a massive invasion of armed settlers. These settlers cut down our forests, mining our minerals, and ranch cattle on our lands. They are pushing us off our farmlands and out of our village. This is a human crisis. The invasion is undermining the ecological roots of our culture. Mosquito people have taken care of the Mosquitia forests and rivers for more than 2,000 years, but the settlers are destroying the forests and poisoning the rivers. The settlers do not share indigenous values or culture and are not respecting the indigenous practice. The Liwa Maiden, our river spirit, is dying. Duende, our forest spirit, is dying. We are in an eco-cultural crisis. I want to share the story of the Liwa Maiden. Liwa Maiden is a merry maid. It's a female with long hair, and from her waist down, she's like a fish tail. From when we were small, the elders taught us that the Liwa Maiden is the river spirit who gives balance in the water. In my culture, we have the belief that if you destroy or poison the water, the Liwa Maiden will take away someone's life. Now, because of the land grabbing, the rivers are dying, the creeks are dying, Liwa Maiden is dying. My peoples, my culture is dying. The land grabbing has created food insecurity because we are cut off from our farm and gathering lands. In the last 5 years, in just 12 communities of these 304 villages, the land grabbing has taken away more than 20,000 hectares of indigenous farmland. In addition, my people have lost access to areas where they carry out traditional activities like hunting, fishing, and collecting traditional medicines. My people are dying of hunger. We are in a humanitarian crisis. I will share a testimony with you all. We have a banana named Pilipita. It's a type of banana we eat, but is a wild banana. There is an indigenous woman who has 2 small children who can't go to her farmland. They don't have their basic food like rice, beans, plantain, cassava. She has been feeding her kids Pilipita 3 meals a day. One morning when her kids got up, the child said he didn't want to eat the Pilipita. He was so tired to eat only Pilipita. She didn't have anything else to offer to him, nothing she had. She told the kid to go outside to play with his neighbors. She thought if he goes to play, then he will get more hungry and will come back to eat. When he went out, she went to look for a lime she added lime to the pilipita. And when the kid came back, she gave the pilipita with the lime and he ate it. But now, after 15 days more of pilipita with lime, the kid don't want to eat no more. But this is all she has to give him. This is how indigenous mothers are living. And now we are facing COVID-19. Most indigenous villages have no health center. The ones that do have no supplies and no infection disease training nor medication. The government actually is holding public gathering called Love in the Time of COVID. In our village, the government is inviting indigenous people and other people to play baseball, exposing many more people to the virus and causing conflict between youth and elders. I will close by saying that we know it is bad. The situation is very bad. We live it every day, but we have learned from this report that it is even worse. We have learned in this report that the government has sold of much more of our land that we knew. We learned that government officials collude in illegal land sales and state-sponsor police repression of community who resist the land grabbing. But this report is a ray of sunshine telling the world the truth of our situation. We continue to work for full land and human rights of indigenous and Afro-descendant people in Nicaragua by struggling in areas of legal rights, food security, and natural resource protection. Kendall will speak about the specific areas and projects we work in. Thank you to the Oakland Institute. Thank you, Anuradha. And thank you all for coming and caring about indigenous people in Nicaragua.
Thank you, Lottie. I appreciate you sharing that insight into the lives of the community. And, you know, I just want to convey to people, yeah, imagine this place where there are more than 300,000 indigenous people living in their traditional territories that they've occupied for thousands of years and tended, still speaking their indigenous languages together. And this is a remarkable situation that still exists on this planet. There are so few places where there are this many people together in their culture, speaking their language together, intending one of the largest forests in Central America that makes it not just important for the continuation of the culture of these folks, but for the continue of the culture of the entire globe, for the importance of the climate stabilization that Indigenous Nicaraguans offer to all of us so that we can all continue to thrive. So this issue is of tremendous importance both in the region and globally. And so I'll speak to the work that my organization, the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center, and I are doing with CEJUDHCAN and other partners on the ground. And we're operating within a three-part theory of change, which is a legal, landscape, and leverage approach. The legal approach, which Lottie at CEJUDHCAN and CEJIL they lead, involves really 3 areas. And one is the litigation towards Saneamiento, and to move that forward to complete the titling, the communal titling of the indigenous territories. Along with that, there's the continual defense of the indigenous territorial governments who are constantly under attack and criminalization from the state. And then lastly, there is an ongoing women's right effort to continue to uplift the voices of women along with the process of human and land rights. Second is the area of landscape, and this focuses on the ability of people to stay on their land while they're struggling for the right to stay on their land. Because as people are dispossessed from their land, then they de facto lose that land. And so it's essential during this struggle that people are able to stay there. So besides the violence that threatens people on a daily basis, people are unable to access their farmlands, creating food insecurity. So one of the initiatives that we've been collaborating on is a women's agroecology project where women are moving their agricultural production from their farmland to the safety of the village. This is really hard work because the village soil is highly compacted, it's poor soils, and that's where people keep their animals, their pigs and their horses and everything that wants to eat what we all like to eat. And so as you can see with this woman here, there's been a tremendous learning curve around building fences with all kinds of different materials that are strong enough to withstand the tropical sun, water, and animals. So there's constant experiments going on and research in the villages around that. And then the planting of traditional crops that can be grown in a much more higher density that can result in a complete nutritious diet and caloric intake that's needed. And people are having great success. This work is being mostly done within the 21 most impacted communities, 12 of which, as Guillermo mentioned, are under the protection of the Inter-American system. But of course, that needs to expand to the other 90% of the 304 communities who are also having limited access to their farmlands. In addition to this, people need not just food, but other resources, especially oil, soap, flour. And these are all things that currently communities have to barter or buy for outside the communities. So women would like to expand their agroecology program work to include local enterprise, specifically around oil and soap. And we are currently looking for funding to support the expansion, of this into this work. And I want to give a big shout out to World Centric, who's been an incredible partner and supporter of the Women's Agroecology program for many years now, and who've really made this possible. So thank you so much, World Centric. And the last area is that of leverage. And this is to address the underlying causes of deforestation. And those of us working in the Mesquitía are collaborating region-wide with an alliance called the Five Forest Alliance. And this is being led by organizations such as Global Wildlife Conservation and the Wildlife Conservation Society. This work has to be done on a regional scale because the cattle that are destroying these forests are moved from one area to the other. So we can't just address one area, we have to do it as a whole. So we have this initiative where we are mapping the beef supply chain and looking for effective interventions. Fundamental to that is the Indigenous Forest Rangers forces, who are currently operating in some of those 5 forests and who really root the possibility of a forest-friendly beef supply chain in which they engage in non-confrontational forest monitoring. We are currently enrolling people in this incredible process of mapping the beef supply chain, and are interested in working with people virtually to do this research. So if you're retired, if you're a college student and you're interested in collaborating with us, please contact me, Kendall, at oaec.org, and we will sign you up. And you can go to our website to learn more about the work that CEJUDHCAN and OAC and our partners are doing together. So I'm going to come back over here, and there we go. Great. And Anuradha, is my screen cleared? Yeah. Okay, great. So we are going to move into the Q&A session. Anuradha, I'm going to address this question to you, that one of the questions that people have is around, there's been some critique of the value of the Inter-American Court and the regional human rights mechanisms, then that they're limited to the fact that they focus just on legal aspects of the Saneamiento and not on the socio-cultural implications and long-term solutions, and causes more division in the communities. So I'm wondering if you could start speaking to that, and then perhaps we could hear from some of the other panelists. Was that question clear?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Kendall. Yes, in the report, one of the officials, actually Myrna Cunningham, responded to our questions, saying that, basically suggesting that the Inter-American Court is not interested in solving the problem. I have to say, as pointed out by Guillermo, this struggle where the national mechanisms for justice have failed the indigenous, that is when the communities have been forced to go to the regional mechanisms. So to hear from an individual so prominent in the human rights field, somebody who has chaired the Permanent Forum on the Indigenous, to mock this instrument that is available to the communities to seek redress was pretty stunning. It is almost like saying, when there's domestic abuse at home or domestic violence, that it's a domestic problem, that the court or the police or the intervention from outside will not help the communities or the case. So I think it is we have to recognize it has been the failure of domestic mechanisms to provide justice to the indigenous. It has been the collusion and complicity of the Nicaraguan government officials, both nationally and internationally. And for anyone to say that the communities who are suffering so much should not go to the Inter-American Court and try to solve the problem peacefully, not wash the dirty laundry outside, is quite ridiculous, especially coming from somebody prominent in the international arena of human rights and renowned as indigenous leader for indigenous rights.
Great, thank you, Anuradha. Lottie or Guillermo, would you like to speak to the use of the Inter-American Court as well? Guillermo?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
The reason why the communities are pursuing their rights through the Inter-American Court.
Yeah, the Inter-American Court and the Inter-American Commission in general appears as an international protection of, international system of protection of human rights when the governments and the states fail to attend the reality of the communities. This is basically the nature of the international system, to as a way or a route to bring justice and international responsibility of the states in the case of human rights violations. This is why we take the decision to go through the protection measures once that the state failed in different occasions to bring justice to the communities and to protect protect them security. But maybe Lottie can go deeper into that, so he can also share her thoughts.
I will just add on to complement with what Guillermo said, is that for us, we have to use the international mechanism, because like I told before, that in Nicaragua, we are facing a difficult situation of human rights crisis. So there is a lot of impunity and lack of access to justice. And there is, we has more than 40 for people who has been murdered, and none of these cases, the criminal justice has take and access justice. There is no, there is just impunity in all these cases. We have a lot of people who has been murdered, like how I said, kidnapped. We have indigenous people who has been disappeared, and so that is why we has this, we has tried to go into the internal mechanism, the national mechanism, but we face a lot of impunity. So that is why when we saw that the violence was increasing, we had to go to the international mechanism.
Great, thank you. Anuradha, can you speak to the question that is the Oakland Institute as part of your legal or advocacy strategy? Will you be taking any legal actions against some of the companies involved in exploiting the resources that you uncovered?
Sure. Kendall, as a follow-up to the release of the report, which I'm very glad, despite world's attention focused on the pandemic, generated and continues to generate vast media coverage. And as a follow-up now, this report is being sent to all the UN officials and everyone in the international human rights system. A lot of our research is often used in the court cases. So our hope is that though this report was independent, CEJIL got to see a copy of the report 2 days before it came out, that they would find, the lawyers involved would find this report useful in their ongoing work at the Inter-American Court. We will be using this report also with Canadian government officials, given the number of Canadian gold mining companies, for instance, to hold them accountable. Canada is one of the important bilateral donors to Nicaragua, which quietly had stopped payments to Nicaragua in the wake of human rights repression following 2018 protests. But we want to further tighten the screws on these companies who are getting rich, and especially during the pandemic, and as the gold prices soar, they're benefiting from and profiteering from the plight of the indigenous in the North Caribbean coast. So we will be targeting them, as well as the US government officials. So we seek support from all of you in joining us. I have been delighted to receive messages from European NGOs who are looking at financial institutions that I mentioned before, FMO, as well as FinFund, to advocate for ensuring that they're not financing projects on indigenous lands that are taking over their lands. So it'll be a lot of work in the coming days, months, and years, and look forward to people's participation, groups' participation in that work.
Anuradha, can you speak a bit more about the involvement of local and national Nicaraguan government officials and their families in the land grab?
I would encourage everyone to read the report, which details, for instance, the name I mentioned previously of Myrna Cunningham, who was the chair of the Permanent Forum on the Indigenous, who in an interview to the Oakland Institute suggested that this problem should really be resolved through dialogue between the settlers and the indigenous communities, who feels that the Inter-American Code is, is not really interested in providing solutions, who also suggested that the organizations that are working with the indigenous are encouraging the indigenous to take up arms, which is a very dangerous allegation to make, given the change of laws and the repression of human rights and criminalization of dissent in Nicaragua, because those kind of fake charges can lead to arrest of people like Guillermo or Lottie and other lawyers who already face death threats. It is, however, interesting, as the report mentions, that Myrna is also sister of Rose Cunningham, who's the mayor of Waspam, which has deliberately ignored, and the police officials have ignored, when the indigenous have reported killings and kidnappings. No action has been taken, as pointed out by Guillermo and CEJIL. She's also mother of Carlos Aleman, who is the governor of the North Caribbean coast, and the documentation obtained and reported previously in Nicaragua clearly demonstrates that he is involved in the illegal land sales. So there's a very close collusion of prominent officials, also from the Yatuma party, not just the Sandinistas, which have been engaged in selling of lands, in encouraging the colonials to take over the lands, the transnational corporations to take over the lands. Ortega family has its own companies, such as Alba Forestal, which are engaged in forestry projects on indigenous lands. So it is not surprising that they afford impunity and look the other way, or refuse to investigate the killings, and more important, refuse to implement decisions of the Inter-American Code, as we have seen in the case of Avas Tigme.
Thank you. Lottie, can you speak to more about what is happening in the communities with COVID, and what the government's response is there to COVID, and how that is affecting?
Like I said, that the COVID situation is, there is lack of information to the communities. We had tried to access some information in indigenous language by radio, but there is no, the majority of these community don't have no health center, and where has health center, there is no medication and no type of, for example, first aid medication that at least the community could get to somewhere. And these communities are very far, are 2 days, 3 days traveling to get to one of these centers, are by the municipality, and this is impossible. So the concern we have is that the community has been suffering crisis of this displacement before the COVID, and there was done insecurity of food and lack of basically food and soap, and those are the things what has community has been calling for, even salt, because they don't have salt. Yesterday we got some call from some leaders, and they were saying that they don't have not even one aspirin or one acetaminophen in the center, that the nurse went 2 weeks back to look for medication and came back with his hand empty, because the health center in the municipality told them that they don't have no medication. And the concern is that if they as community, they are taking measure that the community members don't travel, and they don't want to receive people who is outsiders coming into their community. But then they said how they are going to access the basic thing like salt that they could survive. Situation is very difficult.
Thanks, Lottie. So we're just going to do one more question, and people ask, what are a few of the key steps that could open a path to a just solution? And it's linked to another question around what you want to accomplish with mapping the value, the beef supply chain. And so I'll just speak a little bit to that in the collaboration that CEJUDHCAN and OAC and others are doing, in that and really, the power is working in the three different areas simultaneously. That the communities are have a fierce litigation strategy to that they clearly keep winning rulings from the Inter-American system and protections that aren't doing much to move the state, but is helping to continue to inform the rest of the world, and hopefully will inform those the funders and the 50% of the GDP of Nicaragua that comes in the form of international aid, and to really question the impact and the value of that. And then on the landscape level, people are, Mosquito people and indigenous folks are incredibly adaptable and are working as hard as they can to stay in place and address the issues. The innovation of moving their agricultural production to their villages has been really interesting, in that was innovated by indigenous women, and in other places people call it biointensive agriculture, but Mosquito women came up with that methodology on their own, knowing that that's what they needed to do. And so it's been a process of supporting them to be the researchers of their own experiment that they're doing, really, as I mentioned, learning how to build fences with the materials they have, and which is a really arduous task. If you've ever built a fence, and a really big fence of around a hectare garden, as well as to be soil builders, because traditionally the methods of growing in the forest would help build the soil itself. So they're having to be that force of nature, and they're doing an incredibly good job. But that program really needs to expand rapidly to more than just the 21 communities, because as we said, 90% of the 300 communities are facing food insecurity. And then the last piece is around the leverage, and that is trying to stop the inflows of money for the destructive behavior of pillaging the forests and violating the rights of the people who live there. The rights of the people who live in these forests are being violated, not just because of are largely because of the resources that are there, the precious hardwoods, and then that get removed, and then the cattle that then is pastured there, which then permanently locks those forest lands into pasture and acts as the basis of the for non-native peoples to stay in that areas. So addressing the supply chains that are coming out of those areas is absolutely essential. Of course, that's a huge job. People who've been working on the Amazon and Indonesia, are working on this. But there are a lot of really great innovative legislative solutions and consumer solutions that we can drive here in the US, because more than 75% of the beef that comes out of Nicaragua and Central America comes to the US. So we have a lot of power here in the US to then push back and down through that supply chain and demand things like real, actual traceability that ensures that we know where our beef is coming from and that it is not violating human rights and destroying forests. so that's what we're actively working on. And I think the real power and the hope is working in these coalitions, you know, in these 3 different areas. So that is really exciting for those of us who are working together and seeing and feeling that synergy. Let's see. Great. So thank you very much. We are going to transition from the Q&A. And I know there's lots more questions here that we just can't get to. So you're welcome to continue to send us more questions. And we are going to be doing smaller group calls with people to go more in depth with this. But I would like to transition to this award that we get to give out. So we're really honored. Of course, before the pandemic, this was going to be in person, and now we're doing things the new way. So I want to welcome Anuradha. Are you going to introduce Gracia?
Yes.
I can probably introduce myself. It's probably easier.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Welcome, Gracia.
Hi, thanks a lot. And first of all, let me just thank all of you, because the words, the thoughts that you have shared are very moving, and I feel, yeah, privileged to be here and to understand what you have talked about, and especially privileged to know about this report, which is so important. Thanks so much, Anuradha, and all of you together who have managed to put together the resources, the energy, and the courage to go there and make the world understand what's going on. That is so often we don't understand, we don't hear what is going on in so many places in the world. So thank you so much. I'm just here to tell you a little bit about the Paul Feyerabend Foundation, which is a very small foundation based in Switzerland. It has an international board, and it has been active for about 15 years. The name is to honor the memory of Paul Feyerabend, who is a historian and philosopher of science, is someone who has argued for the value of diverse ways of understanding and making sense of the world. And the foundation, however, is dedicated to community solidarity. And by community, we mean both the communities who share a territory and who are a physical community, but also communities of spirit, of intent, of joint and common projects. And solidarity, we use it as, let's say, not in opposition, but let's say as a distinction from charity, because it's about trying to give something, trying to offer something, but not without really trying to act on the root causes of the problems, not just maintaining things as they are. And so you can imagine, for a small foundation, promoting throughout the world community solidarity is like an amazing, nearly ridiculous aim. But what we have tried to do is to support projects. We have, in the 15 years, we have supported about 50 projects, small ones, but all over the world. And 20 times we have offered an award, which is called the Paul Feyerabend Award. And this is for people and communities. Sometimes we have given it to communities who are truly inspiring for community solidarity. And the award is about a small sum of money and a metal plaque that is usually given in a public ceremony. The foundation works through nominators, and we have about 200 nominators throughout the world, and the nominators are personally known by the people in the board of the foundation. And one of our very highly valuable nominators is Anuradha. And in 2018, Anuradha sent us a nomination for Lottie Cunningham. And I'm so pleased to tell you that this was probably one of the fastest and most moving moments in our foundation, because we were all unanimous in saying that this woman is fantastic and she deserves so much recognition throughout the world. And so we thought that the 219 Paul Feyerabend Award would be just a tiny contribution we could give to the work that she's doing. So the award is very small. It has not much visibility, as she and others know, but I'm pleased to say that starting from that, some of our past awardees now have received very important and large recognitions throughout the world. And I'm making my own commitment right now to try my best to see this, if Lottie is wanting this, to make sure that this is just a stepping stone towards better recognition of this indecent situation that is happening in Nicaragua. We all need to do as much as we can for this. So Lottie has received the award, but she has not yet received the plaque. And so we thought that maybe this is a sort of, poor substitution for doing it in Nicaragua, but in Nicaragua we also found that maybe it was not entirely safe, and we wanted to do it in California, but now it's even, Anuradha was trying to organize something, but it's even not very safe with COVID, so we'll do it in an electronic way. I don't know. Well, I'll pass the word to Anuradha, and I just would like to thank all of you, because this is a very important thing that you have put together. Thank you.
Thank you, Gracia. Yeah, as mentioned, this is an independent report, and during the course of the work, I got to know organizations such as CEJIL and CEJUDHCAN, while not working directly with them, but I heard of the struggle that they carry out together with the communities that are impacted. Being there, met some of the fiercest human rights defenders, but one of the most fierce and inspiring person turned out to be Lottie Cunningham, a Mosquito Indigenous lawyer that has been struggling forever on behalf of her people, even facing death threats. Perhaps we did not say it clearly enough. For the work that Lottie has been doing at the Inter-American Court, she has faced death threats. She is under the protection orders of the Inter-American Court, along with other lawyers of CEJUDHCAN. We were concerned when the research was going to be made public, what the implications would be in terms of safety and security of Lottie. Will CEJUDHCAN's office be shut down? And her response always has been that no report, nothing can endanger me further. I live with threat and danger every day. I take responsibility for the delay in the coming out of the report. As mentioned, over 100 pages, and thoroughness and rigor of the report delayed the awarding of this beautiful plaque. It is beautiful and golden and amazing, like you, Lottie, with all our love and gratitude and respect and a commitment to continue on this struggle with you and for your people, and to all the brave human rights defenders that we met. So a commitment of solidarity, and this is for you. And Lottie, over to you if you would want to say a few words.
Thank you, Anuradha. I am deeply grateful for this honor, and I want to express my sincere gratitude to the Foundation of Paul Feyerabend Award for recognizing me and my team. I am truly humbled to accept this award in the name of the indigenous people who have gave their life defending Mother Earth, and to many indigenous and Afro-descendants, people of the Caribbean coast who suffer and struggle for life and their territory. I could not make it without my team. To them is special gratitude. Also, my wonderful family who support me, and many partners who have collaborated with us in achieving the dream of my people, so that one day social justice prevail in our community. The award will be used in these crucial times to continue to seek social justice for all Indigenous and Afro-descendants communities on the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua. Thank you, Anuradha and Gracia, for believing in me and to nominate us for this very important award.
Thank you, Lottie. Congratulations, you deserve it, working at the forefront of this exhausting and critical work. So thank you so much. Thank you, Gracia, for that, and Guillermo for giving us the legal context, and of course, Anuradha for this incredible and thorough report. We will be offering follow-up calls with those of you who are interested in learning more details about both the report and the work that we are doing on the ground. If you would like to support any of the organizations that you've heard of here, you can go directly to Oakland Institute, CEJIL, CEJUDHCAN, or OAC. OAC's page has a link to all of our organizations. So you can learn more about that. And I want to say Tinki Pali, thank you very much, and Winamba. Let's keep this going.